Hello! In this video, I will present and define risk in general terms, disaster and disaster risk. Then I will explain what we mean by disaster risk reduction. Finally, I will present the definitions of capacity and resilience, and we will end this video by looking at how disaster risk reduction is related to climate change adaptation, and sustainable development. In this course, you have seen the definition of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, and more recently, how risk is defined in mathematical terms. Now I will explain risk as defined by UNISDR and how the mathematical term of risk relates to the one defined by UNISDR. In mathematical terms, the random experiment is the context, the place, the time, etc., where an event may happen. The undesirable outcome would be what UNISDR defines as an event. The expected loss would be the potential consequences, financial, environmental, social, the loss of lives, etc. Risk can be objectively defined so that two people can take the same data and come up with a similar result. Risk can be expressed in many ways, as long as it combines an event, usually an undesirable event, with a likelihood and its potential consequences. One can use the methods of science, engineering, and math in order to define risks. To calculate the total risk of n events with consequences Ci and occurrence probabilities Pi, we need to calculate the sum of the risks from the individual events. With this notion of risk, we can now see how disaster is defined. According to UNISDR, disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society due to hazardous events interacting with conditions of vulnerability and exposure, leading to widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impacts. Disasters result from the combination of the exposure to a hazard, the vulnerability aspects, and the insufficient capacity to reduce or address the potential negative consequences. Disaster impacts may include loss of life, injury, disease, and other negative effects on human physical, mental, and social well-being, together with damage to property, destruction of assets, loss of services, social and economic disruption, and environmental degradation. These losses could be classified in direct or indirect losses. Direct losses include damaged infrastructure and lost lives, while indirect losses can consist of lost education or economic opportunities. Now that we know about risk and disaster, we can move on to understand what we mean by disaster risk. Disaster risk is considered to be a function of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. It is normally expressed as a probability of the loss of life, injury, or destroyed or damaged assets, which could occur to a system, society, or a community in a specific period of time. Let us combine the different elements such as risk and disaster and look at how disaster risk reduction is defined. Disaster risk reduction is the policy objective aimed at preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing residual risk, all of which contributes to strengthening resilience. So the central question is, how can we reduce disaster risk? We reduce disaster risk through increasing capacity and resilience. Capacity and resilience are two terms that go together and are the opposite of vulnerability. We could say that capacity and resilience are on one side of a coin, while vulnerability is on the other. Let us first define capacity. Capacity is the combination of all the strengths, attributes, and resources available within a community, society, or organization to manage and reduce the risks and strengthen resilience. Capacity may include infrastructure and physical means, institutions, societal coping abilities, as well as human knowledge, skills, and collective attributes, such as social relationships, leadership, and management. Let us now look at three important terms. The first one is capacity development. Capacity development is the process by which people, organizations, and society systematically stimulate and develop their capacities over time to achieve social and economic goals through improvement of knowledge, skills, and institutions. Capacity building, on the other hand, is more associated with technical cooperation, suggesting that capacity does not yet exist and has to be built from scratch. The last term, coping capacity, is the ability of people, organizations, and systems using available skills and resources to manage adverse conditions, risk, or disasters. Here you see a video showing community members in a village in Nepal using their skills and capacities as a response to the 2015 earthquake that affected Nepal. In the picture, we also see how a member of an organization provides public awareness and information to a hearing-impaired girl about disaster risk reduction. So what is resilience? Resilience is the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate to, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. Resilience means the ability to resile from or bounce back from a shock. The resilience of a community in respect to potential hazard events is determined by the degree to which the community has the necessary resources and is capable of organizing itself both prior and during times of need. For instance, if a community that lives in a hurricane-prone area has established a common fund for infrastructure damage in case of disasters, they are more resilient as they will be able to bounce back quickly after a hurricane by using their fund to repair damaged infrastructure. Now I will talk about how the term resilience connects to sustainable development. In this course, and working on disaster risk reduction in general, you will hear about long-term resilience. For example, this graph shows the resilience level when interventions to strengthen resilience aim to address underlying causes of vulnerability in order to protect development, reduce and mitigate radical drops in resilience caused by disasters and crises, and enhance bouncing back from adversity. So in the absence of a long-term resilience program, the danger that a community drops below the critical resilience level is much higher. As we saw, there are different levels of resilience. A term that should be mentioned when discussing these different levels is transformational resilience. According to Dr. Karen Sudmeyer, a specialist on ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, whom you will also meet in this MOOC, we need to distinguish between passive resilience, where the focus is on short-term bounce back and recovery, to a more active and transformational resilience, where the focus is on the long-term reduced risk and resilience through prevention. Root causes of vulnerability and risks are reduced and power relations are addressed. Overall, transformational resilience is a path towards improved livelihoods, well-being, risk reduction, and ultimately, sustainable development. Disaster risk reduction is also closely linked to climate change. As you have seen this week, climate change induces variations in frequency, intensity, spatial extent, duration, and timing of extreme weather and climate events, and how these variations impact flooding, for example. It is predicted that those will be more numerous, and therefore that it is highly likely that there will be more weather-related disasters. Consequently, disaster risk reduction needs to take into account climate change and its effects. It should also be coherent with climate change adaptation strategies and activities. Moreover, disaster risk reduction is directly linked to sustainable development. Disasters increase poverty, economic inequality, and social exclusion, and are thus an obstacle to development. Therefore, reducing disaster risks is an opportunity for sustainable development. In conclusion, the take-home main points of this video include: risks can be expressed in many ways, so long as it combines an event with a likelihood and potential consequences. DRR is the concept and practice of reducing disaster risks. Capacity and resilience are the opposite of vulnerability, and DRR is directly linked to sustainable development.